So welcome. This is the first in a series that actually is extending from our opening day introduction to library tech students. This is an introduction to types of libraries with Cuesta College Librarians. So we have 9 of our librarians here today to talk about different places where they've worked and to share some information and answer student questions. So we have Denise and Jenna who are here talking about public libraries, Ellen, Mark, and Lori talking about academic and college university libraries, Denise, Sharia, and myself talking about special archives and other history centers, etc. And we have Sharon and Michelle talking about school P12 librarians, PK-12 librarians. So this will be, our format will have the librarians talk about their experiences and kind of run through some standard questions that we usually talk to the students about. It extends from a group exercise that we used to do when we met our library students in person, and we would break into groups and go through these activities and have it kind of a get to know each other session, which was really great for the students and great for us to get to know the students. So now that we're in COVID and working online so much, we thought it would be great to bring it to you in this format. We're also probably going to continue doing these with other more in-depth workshops or webinars on other aspects of working in a library. So look forward to those. That'll continue through the fall and into the spring. So I'm going to, I also wanted to say we're in our format today, we'll have the librarians talk and then we'll ask questions, open up for student questions, either in text or asking your question on your camera. And we'll also be bringing some questions that we received from students in our classes this semester. And we'll be keeping to a pretty quick timeline. It's going to be an hour for the whole presentation today. So we'll have to do one question per student and run through, and then at the end we'll open it up. And also at the end I wanted to flag that we're going to talk about some general topics like our responses to COVID and that type of thing. So if you have a general question, we'll be saving that to the end. Denise is going to be our MC and kind of lead us through the program today, so I'll hand it off to Denise.
Okay, thank you, Karina. Welcome everybody. Thanks for taking an hour of your time this evening to join us. Again, we're going to look for your questions in the chat. So if you haven't opened your chat screen over on my computer, it's on the right-hand side of my screen. You'll want to do that. And if you want to see who's here, click on the participants icon also. That'll give you a chance to see who's who. Hopefully people have their real names up there. Anyway, we're going to start with there are 4 categories of libraries that are typically the divisions that we talk about, and you're probably reading about that in some of your courses and textbooks and online readings. So we're going to tackle public libraries. That will be our first one. Then we're going to go to academic, which is not school, it's college and university, and sometimes those terms get confused and confuse people and mixed up. We'll talk about special libraries, which is the catch-all. That's like everything else that doesn't fit into the other 3 neater categories. And we have some interesting things to say about those. And then our 4th one will be school, which would be PK, pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, and could be private or public schools. After that, we will, as Karina said, kind of wrap up with some general things like how libraries are responding, thank you, to COVID with all of its challenges. Okay, so for our first segment, we're going to do public libraries, and that's going to be Jenna and me. So why don't you start, Jenna, and then I can chime in. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my experience in public libraries. I first started in public libraries in 2010. And some of my background in this area actually started with small and rural branch management, which is something I really want to highlight because this job was actually classified as a library assistant level 2 position, I hadn't yet received my MLIS. I actually didn't even start library school yet, and was able to get that position. So something like this could be a possibility for LIBT students. So I was the branch manager of a small and rural library, and it was a pretty fantastic opportunity because I had a lot of autonomy and I got to try every single bit of branch management that a normal, or I should say larger size branch manager would be doing. So that involved collection management. So I, selection and purchased books, and deselection. I did all of my own weeding for about a 10,000 book collection. I also, very carefully evaluated my collection. So that involved, pulling statistics and being involved in the community to see, what was needed. And then I did a lot of programming. I worked directly with the Friends of the Library group. My small branch had its own FOL group, which was fantastic. And then I brought new programming and attempted to improve the current programming. I did a lot of reference work, so really a little bit of everything. It was such a great entrance into the library field because I got to try a little bit of everything out and see what I liked or didn't like. It was at that job that I decided to pursue my Master's of Library Science degree, so I did that simultaneously while working. And that branch management LA2 position was part-time, so I often supplemented it with other library work. I worked as a homework center coordinator working with students. It was sort of the library's after-school program where students could drop in and get tutoring help, essentially. I also provided some grant support to the administration office, so that got my foot in the door with grant writing. Then eventually, after I graduated, I was promoted to Librarian of Programming, Outreach, and Grants, and I was stationed in our administrative offices. That also involved a little bit of youth services work. So skills desirable for working in this type of library, in a public library, I don't think there is any skill that would go unused, really. Of course, you want to be adaptable and flexible. When I was working in admin as Librarian of Programming, Outreach, and Grants, my job was different every single day. And I'd have to be able to adapt to working with different communities, different patrons, and the library branches and staff in each different location. I was in Monterey County at the time, which is incredibly diverse. So, we'd have patrons from the Carmel and Pebble Beach area that we'd be working with one day, and the next day I'd be all the way down in King City. I did a lot of travel at the time, so yeah, just being adaptable and being able to relate to those individual communities and population groups was really important. I think it's important to emphasize a willingness to do every part of the job. Some days I'd get a call that the storytime presenter was out sick, and I'd have to be ready to go and do storytime that day. The next day I was working with California State Library grant funders. It really, you have to be able to just hit the ground running and do whatever is called to be that day. It's really the public service part of being a public librarian. Of course, communication, writing skills, public speaking. I never thought being a librarian I would do so much public speaking. So that's a really important skill in my opinion. And again, writing. That's because I did so much grant writing, I see that as an important piece of the job. And I have done a good amount of marketing, and even when you're making flyers and brochures to get the word out, it's important to have those writing skills. So the next question is where to look for these types of job openings. Of course, county websites, city websites are probably the number one go-to. My favorite website is inalj.com, which stands for I need a library job.com. I have always been able to rely on that and been successful. Craigslist. And I don't think newspaper job ads are totally dead yet. That's actually where I found my first library job. And granted, that was 10 years ago, but I still see them now and then, even in the weekly newspapers. So I don't think that's totally gone yet. Individual, if there's a particular library system you live near, you're interested in working for, keep an eye on them and their job websites. Okay, my favorite project or activity from my work in this type of library. When I was moved to admin, I feel like I did just about everything under the sun. Programming, outreach, and grants. That covers a huge amount of territory in the library field, and everything was interwoven. So one of the most fun or biggest projects I ever worked on was a grant. I can't even remember the funders anymore. I think it was Institute of Museum and Library, IMLS, California State Library. Anyways, it was different in that it wasn't a lengthy, descriptive grant application I was writing. It was called Pitch an Idea. So we'd actually got on the phone with the funders and pitched our idea. Our idea was to install 30 little free libraries around the county. And it was a pretty intimidating phone call. We had written out this budget. We had asked for $100,000, and they grilled us on, do you actually need this amount of money? What are you going to use it for? How are you going to manage these? And so on. So we ended up getting the grant, and I managed this project, which we ended up nicknaming the Beast because it was so huge. And we did it. We ended up installing 30 little free libraries all around the county. The point was to provide, free kind of instant access to books to those that might be further away from a branch library or facing some obstacles when trying to reach the library. So sometimes we placed these little free libraries in low-income housing communities, migrant housing communities, which there are a lot in the Salinas Valley area. Sometimes
Jenna, I hate to cut you off, but we're going a little over our time here.
I know I can talk about this.
I know you can. You're always enthusiastic. That's what's great.
But yeah, there's so many opportunities out there. And anyways, if anyone has any questions, or if you want to add something before we get to questions from public libraries, Denise.
I was just going to kind of piggyback off a few things you said. I've worked for 3 different public libraries. That was earlier on in my career. I worked for a county library system in New Jersey. I then worked for a very well-funded independent city library in the Los Angeles area. Then I've also worked for the county library here in San Luis Obispo, and those are all very different opportunities. I would say that what I have seen in those places, and as a public library patron myself and an instructor, for any text going into the public library field, you have to like people. You have to be a people person. If you're not, even if you're behind the scenes, it's not going to be a good fit. And that means people of all walks of life, of all ages, as Jenna said, migrant workers, rich golfing people, whatever, and it's going to be little kids, people with special needs, homeless. So you really encounter the wide range. So you want to think about that. Creativity, yep, that's big, as she mentioned. I would also say in your job hunting, look at funding. Public libraries can tend to have ups and downs in their funding. So you want to maybe dig into that a little bit and look at their funding base and what kind of socioeconomic area that library is. And that's where you want to see, is it an independent city library? Is it a county system? Is it a hybrid system? Is it a joint union with a school? Those are all clues that are helpful in job hunting. So I think that is my spiel on public. And Karina, we want to take a couple, there's a question or two now, or shall we?
I haven't seen any questions come in. Sure, it looks like John Paul has a question.
Okay, John Paul.
I had some kind of difficulty understanding what you were saying at the beginning. Your voice was not capable of understanding technically.
Well, that might be a problem with your system. I
Your
think you'll have to
broadband.
log out and log back on. It sounds like an issue with your internet. So we're going to go on now.
Okay.
Sorry. You'll
Okay.
be able to see the recording and have it be clear.
Okay.
Okay. I think then we'll go on to academics. So we've got Ellen, Mark, and Lori. And if you could be a little more concise, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, Jenna, I really enjoyed listening to you. One thing I enjoy as a librarian about these is I always learn new things about my colleagues, people I see every day. It's like, who knew Denise speaks Russian? Knows some Russian, knows a little Russian. Anyway, let's see. Academic libraries. Now, we already talked a little about how academic libraries are different than school libraries. And when I was kind of poking around looking for academic library jobs for paraprofessionals, and I found that tons and tons of school library jobs came up when I did that search. So be aware, academic libraries we're talking about generally community college, four-year college, major universities. So my experience in academic libraries has not been super extensive. I worked at Cal Poly, and I worked at Cal Poly both as a paraprofessional. I started out in circulation. Actually, I started out volunteering at Cal Poly, and I found that library work was really fun. And I started at Cuesta College in their library technology program. So then I worked at Cal Poly for like 6 or 7 more years in different places, and finally wound up in their learning resources, which is kind of supports kindergarten through 12th grade teachers. And that was really fun. And I got to do a lot of reference work. And I found that the parts of the job I enjoyed the very most were the reference parts. And that I was kind of lucky to be able to do so much of that as a paraprofessional. So then things kind of shifted, and I decided I really liked it, and I went to library school and wound up at Cal Poly working as a reference librarian, and then at Cuesta as a reference librarian. So it's really nice to work in academic libraries for me because I have a chemistry background. So it kind of gave me a way to use my science skills, mesh those in with library work. So as far as skills you need to be a paraprofessional in an academic library, it seems to me, and Mark and Laura, you can jump in on how you feel on this, but my experience has been that you usually need the same degree that the institution you work at grants. So if you work at Cuesta as a paraprofessional, you would probably need an associate's degree. If you work at Cal Poly, most of the paraprofessionals there had an undergraduate degree. And then at a great big university library where the work is more divided into more specialized, you might have an undergraduate degree from a 4-year school, and then maybe also some other specialties like a language specialty, like you might work in cataloging and catalog the Russian literature, or you might work in a big library that serves a large Chinese population or something like that. So at a big library, there's room for more specialized skills. And also something to think about is in academic libraries, at Cuesta, librarians are required to have an MLIS to be a professional librarian. But if it turns out you want to be a librarian at an academic library, often you need an advanced degree in another field, not always anymore, but the bigger the library, the more beneficial it is to have specialized skills. Skills desirable for working in academic libraries. Just like with public libraries, it's good to enjoy working with people. In academic libraries, it tends to be more traditionally college-age people. Although at Cuesta, a community college, it pretty much ranges from teenagers on up as far as you can go. It's good to have good writing and language skills. Also, it is very useful to have Spanish skills or whatever languages are common in your community. So if you're thinking about a paraprofessional job, it's nice to think about your community. Do you have a big Vietnamese population, a big Chinese population? Spanish is almost always helpful. And here's one I remembered. Usually in a larger, like at Cal Poly, they're sort of divided into public services, people who work with the public every day, and technical services, the people who do the cataloging and process the serials and the books and everything. And if you work in public services, it's good to have conflict resolution skills. And I also thought about the ability to have a skin thick enough so that you can recover from somebody being unhappy with the library and taking it out on you.
Ellen, excuse me,
yes.
I don't want you to be unhappy with me, but I thought that was an opening to say that we're running short on time here.
Okay, I'll speed it up.
Okay.
So anyway, I knew a couple of people who worked in technical services because they'd been yelled at, and they really, really didn't like that. So they said, I'm not doing public services, I'm doing tech services.
And I also want to say, I don't think that division is really, we demand everybody have technical skills and everybody have public skills at this point.
Cuesta,
and at Cal Poly, they now put all the techs at the front desk, so nobody gets to go in the back anymore.
Oh man, all right.
I could add to that too.
Lori and Mark.
Yeah, let's hear from Lori and Mark and kind of wind up our academic. Obviously, we could do this for 3 hours. We've got so much to say, but we're going to try to keep to our timetable.
Yeah, that's a good segue to me because I was at University of Wisconsin Libraries for a couple of years. That's a Research One institution, and it had over 30 libraries. So I could just confirm a lot of what Ellen says about if you want to specialize, a bigger library, a bigger university is the place to go. And that public and backroom jobs are not existent there anymore either. Everyone in tech services also worked the reference desk. And literally there was no distinction between the people at the reference desk who were librarians and techs. So that probably varies by institution. And I would add, you have to like students and you have to be passionate about finding them the information that they need. And I think at an academic library, you have to have a tolerance for hierarchy and these sort of attitudes, like the faculty think the world revolves around them, frankly. And so you really have to sort of understand your place in the institution. And it's kind of like what Ellen said, like take things with a grain of salt, don't take things personally, kind of have a thick skin because it's kind of a tough environment. I'll stop there, Mark.
Okay. I've worked in 7 academic libraries in 4 states. And I
win the prize.
I got my start as a technician, a support staff in acquisitions at Washington State University. And I worked there for 6 years, kind of worked my way up from a Tech 1 to a supervisor and decided that I liked this kind of work. And then I went to library school, and all the rest of that stuff was after getting my MLS. One thing that I would add in terms of skills is very critical attention to detail. I don't know, I mean, back in the dark ages, we spent $8 million a year ordering books and journals and things at that institution. And almost all of that work was a combination of little cards with information scribbled on them by professors or faculty or librarians, and then the rest of us trying to, in fairly crude computer systems, trying to identify the particular thing that they were after and then enter the information into our system for making the order happen. Then when the things came in, we did that kind of in reverse and then passed them on to cataloging technicians and so on. So attention to detail is critical. I think in any kind of job, I would second the people skills, the flexibility, and I think curiosity. Particularly in academic library, it kept me sane looking at all the new books coming in because the work was incredibly repetitive. Day after day after day, do the same thing, but realizing all this great stuff that was coming in was kind of a lifesaver. In my experience, most of the academic libraries I worked in California and elsewhere, the majority of our support staff had started as student assistants when they were students in the institution. That's, I think, one reason why you don't see, as Ellen found, you don't see that many ads for support staff positions in academic libraries, because when they have them, they tend to just, okay, somebody leaves, so who else did we like when they worked here for 4 years as an undergraduate? Let's fit them in. They have to go through the process of advertising and so on, but it's advertised locally pretty much. So if you're interested in a particular academic institution, get to know that institution, look at their website, look at their HR for what's going on, but it can be really helpful to find some way in the door as a student assistant or something like that.
And I'm going to jump in here. We did have a question that was submitted to us earlier, and I think it was, I'm going to paraphrase it, Karina. Does it help in a career path or in a job, potential job search in the future to get to know your local librarians in all these different types of libraries? And I would say yes. Libraries until COVID have been one of the few places you can just walk in. No one's going to ask for ID unless it is a special library where there is an institutional confidentiality and security issue. But for public academic, you can usually just walk in. Schools are a little different, but you can arrange a visit in most cases post-COVID. So that is something, yes, get to know your local potential colleagues. And if even right now you can query them via chat, via email, via telephone, you know, and so forth. They tend to be a group that doesn't mind sharing and mentoring. So yes, is the answer. Mark, any last pearls of wisdom?
I don't want to get into my favorite project because that would take too long to explain. So let's go to the next group because we've got more people interested in some of the others.
Right. Okay, thanks guys. So that means we're going to look at special libraries, which is the catch-all for all the things that aren't familiar to you. And I think I'm going to turn that over to Shreya. First of all, she has the job of working at a local prison, which is across the street from Cuesta. And we also have another faculty member who's not here tonight, who is additionally a librarian at the local prison. And there are often many, many job opportunities and openings all the time in prisons in the state of California, at least. Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shreya. I am a correctional librarian at CMC and then part-time at Cuesta. I would definitely say that as far as experience goes, working with the state is a great opportunity because they will hire you with just, if you have just 1 year of your master's completed, and even if you still have a whole nother year to go, they'll take you on as a librarian in title, and then you can work full-time as a librarian while earning your MLIS. So that's a really, really great opportunity to get your degree while getting real life experience at the same time. So I definitely encourage people to do that. That's what I did, and it was a great experience. I'm still there. So I think my only other exposure to working with incarcerated individuals was when I was in library school and I took a reference class. And part of that reference class involved getting reference requests from people that were incarcerated at the San Francisco jail. So they would send their information requests out to us students, and then we would do all the research for them because obviously they didn't have access, and then send the information back to them. So that was kind of my first exposure for working with this really specific population, and my first glimpse kind of into how broad their needs and interests are. I definitely think that that's something that kind of encouraged me to apply for the correctional librarian position when it
Shreya, could you talk a little bit in general about, I don't know if everyone knows that they don't have access to
Internet.
So maybe talk a little bit about just the process of what your day-to-day is.
And also you might share, while most of us are not on campus or in libraries, you are.
Mm-hmm. I am. So So the CMC does not have any internet access for the inmates. We do have 4 computers in the library, and those are updated on a quarterly basis, and those only house the legal collections. So that's where the inmates will go and look up case law and try to do their legal research. But other than that, we are completely reliant on the collection, the physical collection, where they go in person and check out books the old-fashioned way. My role in the library is very similar, I think, in a lot of ways to the public sphere, in that I wear a lot of different hats all day long. Just since being in there, I've had a big hand in collection development, in deselection. I have been able to develop programs, do research, and really foster some relationships with some of my clerks. I have 12 inmate clerks that are that help me run the library on a daily basis. So it's a lot of hats that I wear. Every day is different, and that's, I think, one of the best things about it to me, is that there's always a new challenge around the corner, and every day looks different, and that's something that I really enjoy about the job. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a minute too about the security as you go to work each day? What's that like?
Sure. So in order to get into the prison, I have to go through 3 different security gates. And then we have like an ID card that we have to show. And then we get like a little panic button that's that works when we're within the library. In case something were to happen, we can just push that button, and then a huge loud alarm goes off, and the library gets flooded with officers very quickly, thankfully. But on the day-to-day, there is not an officer in the library, and it's primarily me and a coworker, and then the library houses or holds rather about 50 inmates at a time. So it's very it can be close quarters at times, and I think a big part of just being comfortable in that space is just seeing the inmates as patrons in a library, and kind of moving away from the environment, still being aware of your space and your surroundings, but kind of putting that off to the side and focusing more on the patron and what they need and what they're looking for. Really just kind of humanizing the patrons, if you will.
And we have a question in the chat, Sharia, about are you able to carry your own personal cell phone on your body, or do you have to check that in as you go through security?
No, you have to leave it in your car. Mm-hmm.
Oh, in your car. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So that gives you like I say, institutional libraries could be the prison, as we're talking about with Sharia, could be a hospital setting. It also, special libraries also includes corporate, medical, and then there's the whole local history kind of special collections part. And I think I'm just gonna touch upon some of those. One of the questions we did have that was submitted earlier, are there many special libraries in San Luis Obispo County? No, very few. Prisons are perhaps the exception. One of the characteristics of most special libraries outside of prisons is that they are in urban areas where there are a lot larger populations, more funding, more specialization, museums, art centers, historical museums, things like that. So locally, no, there's really only like a couple.
There's a law library, a small law library, as we mentioned.
There's a small county law library, and they do typically, they've hired folks from our program. People ask if they can get a job at Hearst Castle in the staff library there. No, I've actually had the privilege of working up there as a consultant, and it's people who are already guides and go through a state process to be a historical guide. Then they get a few hours shaved off their guiding to staff the small, very small library. The other thing about special libraries, and Sharia touched upon this too, is the clientele, the patrons that you are serving are very, very narrowly focused. So if it's an art museum, it might be the curator, maybe some folks, the docents that are part of that museum. For the prisons, it's going to be the incarcerated, and perhaps, I don't know, a few staffing requests from staff. Medical facilities, medical libraries, it's going to be your staff. Could be doctors, analysts, whatever. Those kinds of places aren't open to the general public as a whole, and they might not be at all. So again, as we heard about the prison across the street, you're going to have security, confidentiality statements and agreements, a whole different environment than the public, the academic, and even the school library that we talked about.
We also are seeing a shift in corporate libraries to non-master's degree or non-library master's degree staff. So there might be opportunities there, but it would probably be with some education in whatever that corporate research was doing. So you might have a firm that helps stockbrokers,
Law library, yeah.
research certain market trends. So they might specialize in defense department. It might be medical research. So you could be part of a research team, but not and be at a tech level, but it would probably require an advanced degree in a different subject.
And another example, actually, that is kind of a special libraries in our area, Vandenberg, the Air Force Base. They have a lot of contractors and people that work in different settings there, and technical settings. And again, they do hire live techs, they hire librarians, but you're probably going to have some technical knowledge there. And I'm going to have to pull the screen down to my window, excuse me.
Okay, and I can jump in. I have some experience as a tech within a special library. I worked at the Getty Research Institute as a cataloging tech while I was in library school. So I did basic cataloging, the first run of cataloging. They were buying a couple $1 million worth of art books and doing the original cataloging on those. There were art historians with European and Asian language experience that were doing the final cataloging, but they had a group of techs that was doing the initial, pulled on the record, do the best you can of recording what you can about the book. And so I was involved in that. I think that I got that job because I'd worked as an editor and had some experience there and thought that cataloging might be interesting, and got a volunteer position with a cataloger in another art museum. And she sort of taught me the basic skills and then of cataloging, and thought I had an aptitude for it. But I still wasn't able to get the library tech job through regular channels. I had to get a reference from her to kind of break into the network. It was really closely networked. I had actually applied for the job through a temp agency and didn't get it, and applied for it through a regular job opening, job listing, and didn't get it. And then finally, when I got in for the interview, they're like, "Oh yeah, you're perfect. You get the job." But it took a while, it took some persistence. I think in that system, it was another like university hierarchical, where it was very top down with the curator making all the decisions, and then a group of, triple masters, PhD, multilingual people having the management positions, and then the techs kind of doing the day-to-day kind of more, like Mark was saying, repetitive work. It was super fascinating. Just they had a vault of amazing books, and that was definitely the most fun part of it, was just to see all those amazing books. And so that's sort of my spiel. And then I did also work with Denise actually in special collections. I don't know if we want to talk about that in Cal Poly.
Just say a sentence or two, yeah.
Sure, do you want to go?
Yeah, one example of a special collection or a special library within an academic library locally is the Special Collections and University Archives at the Cal Poly State University here in SLO. And both Karina and I have experience working there as contract librarians or archivists, which was fascinating, working with primary source materials, specifically the Julia Morgan Hearst drawings, paintings, architectural drawings, all that. That was great. And again, we were both contract people, and that kind of came about with grant funding and special funding based on our being local and our skills that we could
Yeah,
offer.
and I think
to
Denise
projects.
had the subject specialty, and I came in more as a technical person because I gained a lot of experience at the Getty. They're very well known for metadata,
Right.
and I learned a lot about, and then I'd done my graduate work on the California Digital Archive and writing digital finding aids.
So that's another example of if you get to know people in your area and talk to them and let them know what your skills are, and something comes up, you might hear from them. So
yeah, and also from my point of view, learn as many new systems, whatever's hot with whatever programs or languages or anything that you feel drawn to, because if you have those special skills, I think first coming out of school, you kind of have a little bit of cachet with, you know, the latest lingo, and maybe people that have been in the profession for 20 or 30 years and they have the depth of experience, but they might not have the latest thing that they want to put on that grant that needs to, you know, that their young faculty is looking for. So that's important. So I don't see any questions coming in. Maybe we should just, on the spirit of time, let's move on
to schools.
to
Yeah,
school, because I know we have a lot of questions on school, and so we'll have our school librarians talk, and then we'll answer questions about school and then general questions.
okay, so we've got Sharon and Michelle. I don't know, you guys want to just do a tag team thing?
Okay.
I'll leave it up to you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sharon, and I started my career actually as a teacher when I taught 6th grade in New Jersey for 7 years. And in that school in New Jersey, they had teacher credentialed librarians. And that planted a seed, but I didn't do anything about that until I came back to California after having kids and everything, and was like, what's next? I didn't really want to be a teacher again. So I came to Cuesta and got my AA in library technology and started in the school district as a library tech and worked at Laguna Middle School, and then Sunnyside, and then Baywood Elementary. And when I was working at Baywood, I was just doing so much teaching. It was like, it just made sense to go back and get my teacher librarian credential. And you can't get that teacher librarian credential without a base credential. And then while I was up at San Jose, I realized it was only 2 more classes to get my full MLIS. And so I went ahead and got my master's along with that teacher librarian credential. And that was important because Ed Code for the state of California requires that every district have at least 1 credentialed teacher librarian. So in San Luis Coastal, they eliminated all of the teacher credentialed librarians, and I was the one that was hired back. And I was up at that point at the district level, and I was writing curriculum and supervising and in charge of all the library techs who were out at the 16 elementary, middle school, and high school sites. So you do in the school setting, if you want to be a teacher librarian and be paid that way, you do need a teacher, a credential, and a teacher librarian credential. And I also received the CTEL, or the CLAD training, where you get authorization for English learners, so that I could modify and adjust things in the libraries with my techs to take care of English learners also. But for a library tech position in the school district, an AA is required, a bachelor's is preferred. So that's the kind of training that you need. And I was in the school district for 29 years. I worked there quite a long time. So with the skills that are desirable, as other people have said, I mean, patience and flexibility and the ability to multitask. I mean, you might have your lessons planned out for the day when you leave on Tuesday, and then you come in and open up your email on Wednesday, and things are completely different. So that ability to be flexible and to learn from your mistakes. Yeah, and I would say one of the most important things you need to be able to do is that you must love to read and read children's literature, so that you can book talk with it, and so that you can be really good with kids and get to know them and know how to ask questions. And really understand where they're coming from. So being good with kids is really, really crucial.
Sharon, is there a test for whether you like to work with kids? What would you recommend there? And Michelle too, is there a self quiz or self test you could take?
No, they're
Fortunately, an internship is a part of the library tech certification. So if you are interested in working in a school library, you can do that internship, and that will let you know.
Yeah, if you like working with kids, or if you'd rather work with middle schoolers and high schoolers versus pre-K or kindergartners and sixth graders.
Those are very different age groups.
So when Sharon retired and came to work for us, the person that replaced her at that position is Michelle. So let's hear from Michelle a little bit and see what your experience has been.
Right. So I had a bachelor's from Cal Poly and then started volunteering in a school library. Loved it very much and decided to get my library tech certificate and the AA because it was only a couple more classes. So I did that at Cuesta and have been in your shoes and taken those classes. And Mary Spidell was my school libraries teacher. So Ellen was my teacher too, and Denise, so I feel at home here. Immediately did an internship and loved it. Knew elementary was where I wanted to be, and then was able to get a job. I started at Del Mar in Morro Bay. I loved it so much, I started getting my master's sort of in the evenings. San Jose State has an all online program. So I went ahead and did that. And then really, truly, I was doing that thinking, this is something that I want to know more about because I'm passionate about it. And then Sharon ended up retiring and I was able to get my teaching credential and get the teacher librarian certificate in order to get that job. So that is what I am doing now. And I will add just a little bit to some of those skills that Sharon was talking about. I was thinking about this today and I made a giant long list, so I'm gonna go really quickly through it. But I do think a positive attitude and a sense of humor, you have to be willing to humiliate yourself sometimes. Singing a song, or even if you're at a high school library, you're the really enthusiastic person teaching them about digital citizenship or informing them about that. So I think critical thinking skills, that problem solving attitude is helpful in all of our libraries because every day is new and you just never know what might come at you. So being willing to be a team player, all of those things. I think creativity and imagination will always help you get through.
Michelle, I'm going to interrupt because when you say creativity and imagination, I think that's one of the best parts of working in a school library, because I know, for example, one of my favorite projects is I did a reading camp-in where I had over 100 third through sixth graders go to all these different stations and then spend the night in the library. And, I know it was, I'll never do it again, but I mean, that ability to really engage with kids and get them excited about reading and develop that love of reading was great. And other things like that one time when I was reading a book where I had the whole library blacked out and dark, no lights on, nothing. And they all brought flashlights, but I read a section of a book. And then when we got to the climax at the end of the chapter, I blew out the candle so it was completely dark, and the kids were all, and then they used their flashlights to search for library books. So that creativity and that ability to have fun with the kids is something that really is a great piece about working in a school library.
Agreed. And I think all of us mentioned customer service and being people oriented. And in a school library, that means being student oriented and being approachable and being, I'm going to get down at an 8-year-old's level and we're going to have a conversation about how I can help them. And providing genuine, caring customer service to a child literally blows their mind. They can't believe that a grown-up cares about their needs and wants and how every single dinosaur book, we're going to help them find it. So I think having that in general is so helpful in libraries, and then being able to take that to a K-12 customer service, keeping it as high as we would just for an adult, but sharing that with a child is pretty special. We had a couple of questions submitted from students. So instead of sharing one of my favorite things, because I'm really bad at favorite things, I like it all. But somebody asked, what do you recommend as a pathway into this field? And I would say we sort of mentioned it before, but if you are thinking about a K-12 or pre-K through 12 environment, doing an internship with a school district would be a great start as you're completing your certification at Cuesta. And Karina and I work together to try to place people. It's helpful to see different environments, and not, you know, if you're thinking you want elementary, it's also helpful sometimes to see what it's like in middle school or high school. You never know where you might find that you feel at home. So I think that's a good start. If you haven't already reached out to maybe one of the local schools, now is not an ideal time with the COVID regulations and things like that, but volunteering. Our library techs staff our libraries, and then I'm at the district office sort of helping them coordinate, but volunteering is another great place to start to learn the system and see if it's something that you would want to do. Anything to add to that part, Sharon?
No, that's, you know, volunteering is always, I mean, you have parents that volunteer, and then sometimes parents get real jobs and you're stuck with all of this work because the parents can't help anymore. So volunteers are always valued and appreciated. There's always so much to do.
So what do you think, Karina? Do we want to go over to,
does anybody in the audience want to ask any questions, either in the chat or online, specific to school or one of the areas? And then, John, do you have a question about one of the specific areas?
You have to unmute, John. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I thought I emailed a question that would cover all areas.
Yes, we were going to talk about that. John emailed a question in about how we're dealing with COVID. And so I can talk just about our college.
You know, do we want to just see if there are any other specific questions, and then, because that's going to be
that could go the rest
large
of the time.
chunk. Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a few more school-related questions from my students.
Jenna. Yeah, let's ask the school.
Thanks everybody for being flexible.
This one's about on-the-job training. How much on-the-job training occurs in your experience? And I think she was talking specifically about school libraries. I know for me in the public library, in my experience, I had about 2 or 3 weeks of formal training to learn the library system, and then I trained at multiple different branches before being stationed at my own.
So when I was in the school district, I know that we had library tech meetings where we would all meet once a month and really talk about, you know, classroom management strategies and how to book talk and all different kinds of things. And when I had a new tech start, I would always be out there on the site with them for the first week or two, just, you know, for a couple of hours every day, just to make sure they were doing okay and that they were feeling comfortable with things. I'd also arrange a sub so that they could go in and job shadow another library tech just to see a couple of days with them and things like that. So, you know, and then I would always network another tech with the one who was new so that they had somebody they could talk to all the time also besides myself.
I think maybe a summary is, I think in any kind of a situation, you probably will have some formal on-the-job training, and you may go through a probationary period as well. So there's probably not one answer to that question. Any last questions on specific library types before we move on to the more general, how are we reacting to COVID?
I think Jenna had, let's do one more from Jenna from her school.
Oh, okay.
List.
You know what, these may have been covered already. She asked if it's common to reach out to librarians in local communities to job shadow or volunteer, and Michelle, you pretty much said yes to that. Is that appropriate? Any other recommendations? Otherwise, I think we've got it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Right.
and I think with the school libraries, which are managed by individual people, individual librarians or techs, I think you get a better response in terms of, can I come in and help? as soon as you get to a bigger organization, like a big public library or a university, you get into the rules of volunteering. And suddenly you can't just come in, you have to get in the line. And so I'd say that, try to find if you're interested in school, go to your local school and see if that librarian needs your help. That would be
You're
great.
still probably going to encounter, and who knows how this will work post-COVID, but in the pre-COVID, you often have to be fingerprinted. You might be required to have what's that shot we have to get? TB shot, things like that. Those are pretty standard.
Okay, let's talk about COVID. We have a few more minutes. For Cuesta, we got the notice that we had to go online, all online for COVID.
March 13th.
3 days later, we were online. So what we did is we moved all of the reference service all online, and we provide that all by Zoom, chat, email, phone, and being embedded in Canvas classes. And then we had a small group of techs that came in to do essential work and pass out Chromebooks, pass out books, that type of thing. And then we delegated a lot of it to a group of student services employees. So they took our library and made that kind of a central area where they could offer. They have the food bank there. They have the counseling services, financial aid services, because our library is nice and big and has a lot of space. So, but we're not really working there, not really managing it. So how about Sharia? What are you guys doing for COVID? Just business as usual?
No, so we've been on lockdown since even before March, and so what we use what we call a paging system, where the inmates will send us their requests in the mail, in institutional mail, and then I get those directly. I do all the research, compile all the information, and then send it back directly to that one inmate that submitted the request. So I get up to like between 30 and 50 requests a day.
Oh my gosh.
It's been a lot. I'm ready for them to come back.
So just as in other libraries, there is no in-building browsing or touching. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how is, Michelle, since you're at work right now, what is the school doing?
Yes, and I will say too, all of our library techs are back there on campus now, where we also closed down, Friday afternoon, the 13th of March was when we knew. So that part of spring looked a little different. Now we've transitioned in fall and we have curbside pickup for families. We have gotten Chromebooks and hotspots out to all the kids. We use the publisher guidelines to, video read alouds or share them with students. We're quarantining materials just like you guys. And a lot of the same things of trying to move as much online as we can.
And then I think from the feedback I've had from the public library, it's similar. They're back working, a lot of staff working in that, but the browsing is very limited. It's, just pick up what you've placed online. They're not allowing any volunteers in, so it's still pretty severe.
And I think some public libraries are allowing very limited computer use in building and printing, but you typically have to make an appointment in advance, and it's a certain amount of time, and it's very controlled and limited.
Yeah, and I've also heard some public libraries are extending their Wi-Fi networks out into the parking lots, so they're serving their students that way, their patrons that way. Well, here we are at 6. Any closing remarks or closing questions, or we'll come back and do this again under a different guise soon. I hope this has been useful. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, students, for being here and librarians for helping. And we'll post this on our YouTube channel and let you know where it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.